Hey, were the gods of the market? No. They were more. They were proof that capitalism had no limits. They created empires so vast that their very name became synonymous with absolute power and the future. They were literally worth billions. Now, take a deep breath. Think of everything that is solid, unshakable. A glass tower on Wall Street, the software that runs your life, the blood running in your veins, all of it was part of the myth. But what happens when the myth is just a facade? When a $60 billion behemoth turns into smoke in less than a month? In just a few weeks, what seemed eternal vanished. From the corporate cynicism of Enron to the fraudulent glamour of Theranos and the digital pyramids of FTX, we're going to unveil the shadows. These are the dark stories of the billion-dollar empires that evaporated overnight, and how the truth is always the one thing money cannot buy. Case 1, Enron, the illusion of power. 6 consecutive years. Think about that. 6. The most coveted title in corporate America. The most innovative company. They weren't just an energy giant, they were the vanguard. They promised the future. They traded not just gas and electricity, but the weather, bandwidth, the very promise of tomorrow. CEO Jeffrey Skilling, a cold visionary fresh out of Harvard, didn't sell products. He sold trust. Ken Lay, the charismatic founder, sold the American dream, amplified. Behind that brilliance, however, lay a scorched earth philosophy. A corporate culture where the only rule was, make the number. It didn't matter how. Just ensure tomorrow's balance sheet is larger than today's. It was a pressure machine, crushing ethics and law to serve an insatiable appetite for growth. They were untouchable, and that's exactly what made them dangerous. The mystery wasn't in what they did, but in what they concealed. The core of the scheme was a financial architecture of almost artistic complexity. A spiderweb that stretched across the globe, invisible to the naked eye. They called them SPVs, special purpose vehicles, but in reality they were vehicles of concealment. Think of them as black boxes. Thousands of black boxes, created with the singular nefarious goal of absorbing the garbage, the losses, the crushing debts that undermine the company's real value. These losses didn't disappear. They were magically moved from Enron's main balance sheet to the balance sheet of one of these SPVs, entities that legally did not appear to belong to Enron, thanks to ingenious and criminal accounting maneuvers overseen by names like Andy Fasto, the financial magician. The man who turned debt into smoke. This maneuver was the heart of the fiction. Enron appeared to be soaring, with stratospheric profits. But in reality, it was sinking under the weight of billions in debt that the world could not see. It was an empire of paper. A house of cards built on the premise that auditing and regulation were mere bureaucratic details. The insiders knew. Many of them. They were complicit. But the culture of fear and secrecy was absolute. The innovation machine functioned as a machine of intimidation. Questioning the numbers was questioning loyalty. It was risking everything. Enron's rise was so meteoric, so seductive that most investors, banks, and Wall Street analysts chose to believe the lie. It was easier. It was more profitable. No one wanted to be the first to scream that the emperor had no clothes. The truth, however, is stubborn. It always finds a crack. In 2001, Enron began to split under the weight of its own illusions. A detail, a leak, an internal tip. The cascade was unstoppable. The audit firm Arthur Andersen, complicit for years, began to tremble. Panic set in on the executive floor. The order? Destroy. Thousands of documents were shredded. Hard drives wiped clean. A desperate attempt to bury the proof of the crime before the light of day hit the wreckage. The collapse was not merely financial, it was seismic. A company once valued at $67 billion vanished in 24 days. 24 days of hell. The world watched, shocked, as Enron disintegrated. It wasn't just money that was gone. It was thousands of jobs lost overnight. Entire families saw their life savings, their retirement plans crushed by the weight of the fraud. Enron taught us the harshest of lessons. That innovation can be the perfect cover for corruption. That the smartest men, the most successful, can also be the most greedy and dangerous. That the corporate utopia, when built on the sand of lies, is fated to become a ruin. This is not just a tale of bankruptcy. It is a parable about power, arrogance, and the mystery hidden in the numbers we refuse to question. A story about how the truth always comes to light, and about the immeasurable cost of an empire that traded reality for a fiction of billions. Case 2, Theranos, the blood of deception. There is a place where ambition knows no bounds, where the laws of physics are negotiable and innovation is the only religion. That place is Silicon Valley, and in 2014, a figure emerged from its shadows, promising something that seemed straight out of science fiction. Her name, Elizabeth Holmes. She had the look of an idealist, the rehearsed deep voice, the gaze of someone who saw the future. Her promise? To change medicine forever. She wasn't just talking about saving lives, she was talking about democratizing health. At 19, she dropped out of Stanford to found Theranos. And her idea was simple yet brutally effective. Eliminate the fear of the needle. Instead of large syringes and countless tubes of blood, the Theranos system required only a single drop. A superficial finger prick. From this minuscule sample, her device, the Edison, claimed to be capable of running over 200 tests, from cholesterol screening to early cancer detection. It was the cure for modern medicine. The premise was so seductive that reason was cast aside. The world, starved for Silicon Valley success stories, fell to its knees. The biggest names in American power were co-opted onto the board of directors. Former secretaries of state, retired generals, and high-caliber billionaires. They weren't just investing, they were buying a vision. Theranos became an exclusive elite club, and Elizabeth Holmes, the rising star, the youngest self-made female billionaire on the planet. She was the new Steve Jobs, with the black turtleneck as her uniform, a symbol of austerity and relentless focus. But what was actually happening within the glass walls of Palo Alto? Where was the science behind all this financial spectacle? In truth, the Edison was a spectacular technological failure. The blood volume from a single drop was insufficient for most tests, and the dilution process Theranos used made the results almost random. The problem wasn't just a defect, it was a scientific impossibility disguised as innovation. To maintain the facade, the Theranos leadership resorted to a terrifying contingency plan. Most real patient tests were not run on the Pozia Edison. Instead, the blood was quietly sent to traditional machines from competing companies, modified or used improperly. They weren't just hiding their technology's failure. They were actively manipulating the health data of real people. By this point, Theranos wasn't a startup. It was a cult. Any employee who dared to question the scientific results or the validity of the Edison was immediately isolated, legally intimidated, or fired. The non-disclosure agreements were so draconian that employees feared even discussing their work with family. Holmes's partner, the enigmatic Sunny Balwani, acted as the enforcer, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and silence. The fraud could only continue if fear was stronger than morality. But morality, scientific ethics, the urgency of not harming patients, all of this was building up, creating an unsustainable internal pressure. The $9 billion house of cards was brought down by a small group of people with immense courage. Tyler Schultz and Erica Cheung, a young lab technician, were the first to risk everything. They saw the clinical truth firsthand. Absurd results, quality control failures, and a shocking disregard for the Hippocratic Oath. They couldn't live with the secret. They contacted the Wall Street Journal reporter, John Carreyrou, giving him the ammunition of internal data and accounts to start the investigation that would shake the foundations of Theranos. From that moment on, the game was no longer about innovation. It was about survival against the truth. When the Wall Street Journal published the first stories, the world stopped to read. The superstar became a pariah. The genius was revealed to be a lie. The fraud was exposed. Data manipulation, self-deception, and intimidation. Theranos didn't just fail, it imploded, leaving behind a trail of patients with incorrect results, defrauded investors, and a bitter lesson about the fake it till you make it culture. Elizabeth Holmes is imprisoned, the company is gone. But the $9 billion nightmare remains as a case study in the history of capitalism. Case 3. Blockbuster, the giant that laughed at the future. The year was 2004, a time of monolithic certainties. At the center of this universe stood a blue and yellow neon behemoth, a kingdom built on the addictive scent of fresh plastic and the mechanical hum of rewinding machines. The name? Blockbuster. 9,000 temples of entertainment spread across the world map. Millions under the hypnotic sway of their perfect logistics, the ritualistic experience of choosing a movie on a Friday night. Blockbuster didn't just rent tapes, it forged memories. And at the height of this power, its leaders lived in the gilded blindness of invincibility. They were the gods of the market. The market belonged to them. There was no room for shadows. There wasn't even the idea of a fatal flaw. But fate, cunning and ruthless, had already woven the web of ruin. In that same fateful year, death came knocking on the castle door. Not with thunder, but with the silent rustle of a mail envelope. On the other side of the mahogany table, bathed in the cold light of the skyscrapers, sat Netflix, an awkward, small, and almost invisible entity that operated in the logistics shadows, selling a promise Blockbuster deemed absurd. Convenience by mail. They came bearing the key to the future. A simple offer, yet heavy with prophecy. The entirety of their operation, the embryo of their data system, and their disruptive vision, for a trifling sum for the giant, $50 million. What followed was not a negotiation. It was a sacrifice. The Blockbuster executives, swollen with hubris, listened to the proposal. And then, the silence of that sacred room was shattered by something worse than anger. Scorn. Cold metallic laughter echoed. 50 million. Pocket change. They dismissed Netflix as if it were a plague of rats, a niche problem that could never threaten the majesty of the physical tape and store. Why would we buy the future if we are already eternal? Their gazes seemed to say. That laughter, arrogant and final, was the sound of the dirt being thrown onto their own empire. They didn't just refuse the innovation, they mocked it. From that moment on, the market clock stopped for Blockbuster, forever stuck in rewind mode, spooling the past, while the world surged ahead. 6 years, a lapse of time so brief it would barely register in history. But for the Colossus, it was an eternity of slow self-destruction. Netflix, now free and with wounded dignity, did not seek revenge. It sought evolution. It forged a silent weapon called streaming, the art of making convenience absolute. And while families continued to brave the cold and pay Blockbuster's inevitable late fees, a new kingdom of sofa and screen established itself in the darkness of every living room. In 2010, the Neon Castle crumbled, not under a frontal assault, but from internal erosion, from the rust of corporate short-sightedness. Blockbuster, once the certainty, became the impossibility. Its bankruptcy was less a business event and more a silent execution, imposed by the very innovation that it, in a moment of blind arrogance, had sent away. Today, the empty Blockbuster store is not just a decommissioned building. It is a somber monument, a testament that, no matter how solid your empire, the refusal to see the future is the greatest of weaknesses. It saw the prophecy, laughed at it, and now lies, imprisoned in the darkness, with the residual scent of a tape that will never be played again. The legacy of Blockbuster is proof that sometimes the greatest enemy is not out there, but right inside your own boardroom, waiting for a chance to whisper the fatal word, no. Case 4. FTX, the digital pyramid. In 2021, the future was not a vague promise. It had a name, FTX. The cryptocurrency exchange was not just another platform. It presented itself as the new pantheon of digital currency, a beacon of innovation and trust, boasting a market valuation in the billions of dollars. At the heart of this brilliance was its founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF, an eccentric figure in a crumpled t-shirt and an unassuming smile. Quickly anointed by the media as the Warren Buffett of crypto, SBF was the personification of the financial vanguard, the new oracle who seemed to have cracked the code of fortune in the volatile digital market. He was the face of effective altruism, promising to use his immense wealth to save the world, one blockchain transaction at a time. And for a while, the world, seduced by his aura of genius and by sponsorships that ranged from stadiums to global celebrities, believed. What was hidden, however, was the growing darkness that sustained this colossal empire. Behind the facade of polished balance sheets and speeches about infinite liquidity, SBF was building a castle of quicksand. The external audit was a mirage. The reality was a tangled web of intertwined debts, forged numbers, and internal assets that held hands in an unsustainable financial merry-go-round. The company was not solid, but rather an echo chamber built upon carefully crafted lies. The nerve center of this fraud was Alameda Research, the crypto hedge fund founded by SBF himself and secretly linked to FTX. What should have been a separate trading firm, acting cautiously in the market, turned out to be the shadow he used to move what couldn't be seen: the funds of FTX customers. It was a complex hall of mirrors, a massive diversion where the money that millions of users deposited in the exchange to invest was, in reality, secretly borrowed and gambled at Alameda's private roulette table. The rumors, initially discreet whispers, gained substance in 2022. Revelations about Alameda EA's balance sheet being backed mainly by FTX's native token, FTT, exposed the vulnerable house of cards. When FTX's biggest competitor suddenly liquidated its FTT holdings, the panic was triggered. It was the starting gun for the feared digital bank run. Thousands of customers worldwide tried, in a frenzied and desperate wave, to withdraw their money. But the security doors had been sealed shut. Liquidity was zero. The money, which was supposedly safe in their accounts, had vanished. The fall of FTX in November 2022 was not merely the collapse of a technology company. It was the deafening sound of the shattering of trust in a new financial era. Over $8 billion in customer funds simply dematerialized. This was not a market loss, it was outright theft, an intentional diversion of funds that the US Department of Justice would classify as one of the largest financial frauds in history. The once acclaimed prodigy was, in fact, a criminal. The financial genius, a swindler of epic proportions, convicted on multiple counts of fraud. The story of FTX, however, is more than a corporate tragedy. It is a somber warning about the persistence of human nature in the digital age. It teaches us that today, greed no longer requires the finely tailored suit and the pomp of old Wall Street. It hides behind a screen, under the mask of a technological messiah, using complex algorithms and promises of altruism as a disguise. The FTX logo slowly burns in the ashes of the market. Its legacy is not one of innovation, but of a ghost. A reminder that, despite all the technological evolution and the crypto vanguard, the nature of scammers and the insatiable desire for others' fortune remain disturbingly the same. FTX was the future of cryptocurrencies. Its collapse is the specter that will haunt the market for generations. Enron, Theranos, Blockbuster, FTX. Say these names out loud. They are not mere entries in a bankruptcy ledger. They are in fact monoliths of an era, giants that promised to rewrite the future, but which ultimately shared the same inevitable epitaph: collapse. The difference between these stories lies in the technical details, the balance sheets, and the sectors they operated in. But at the core, the narrative is always the same: a fatal trajectory that leads us from the first spark of ambition to the blindness of arrogance, from the opulence of power to the sudden and overwhelming chasm of ruin. We observe the vaults slamming shut with a metallic roar, sealing not just fortunes, but dark secrets. We see the logos vanishing into darkness like corporate ghosts, swallowed by the fog of scandal. And we watch, in slow motion, golden particles disappearing into the air, proving that not all the world's brilliance can conceal the rot at the foundation. This is more than an economics lesson. It is a law of nature. In every empire, whether it was built on natural gas, blood, movie rentals, or digital currencies, there is a point of no return. An exact moment when the elaborate web of lies and dissimulation is stretched beyond any sustainable limit. It is the instant when the truth becomes, quite simply, too heavy to hide. And when that weight of reality crushes the illusion, the inertia of the fall is unstoppable. There is no bank account, no political lobby, no digital token, not even all the money in the world that can halt the slide. The law of moral and financial gravity is implacable. Learn the lesson that echoes through the centuries. The fate of money is ephemeral. Fame is a volatile mirage. But the truth? That remains etched into the cold marble of history. Fortune fades. Truth remains. Of all these billion-dollar implosions, the financial scandal in the shadows of Houston, the biotech gambit that promised to revolutionize healthcare, the entertainment titan crushed by technology, the crypto fraud that shook global confidence. Which one shocked you the most? Which of these disasters did you feel the reverberation of closest to home? Comment your deepest theories and thoughts below. We want to know your perspective on greed and the fall. And if you want to uncover more of these hidden archives, these buried stories that need to be told before they are lost forever, hit the like button on the video and most importantly, subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications. Here on the Hidden Hoards Files, the truth is waiting to be discovered, and the next collapse might be just around the corner. Join the investigation.